Welcome in the ring. We want to welcome each and every one of you this evening. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome, welcome, welcome. Share the live, smash that emoji button for us. We're delighted to have each and every one of you here with us. We're in a slightly different location from our usual broadcast on this side, but we're happy for all of those of you who joined us this morning on our broadcast. Those of you who joined us, joining us now on this broadcast, we are simply delighted to have you folks here with us. We trust you guys have had a great weekend and you hit the ground running for this new week. Thanks for wherever you are joining us from this evening. You're going to want to share the live, folks. Smash that emoji button as well. And we beg of you to partner with us too. We have a guest dropping by, the economist Elson Lowe, and he's going to help us to make some sense, good folks, of this Irfaan Ali's press conference on Saturday morning concerning the mid-year economic report, a very, very important report that you and I should understand, because it has some bearing, whether you live in Guyana or not. And those of you who send remittances home for folks like me, you might got to send more if the economy is not doing so well. So we're going to talk about some of those things, some of the high points, low points. Well, it was pretty much the latter for this press conference on Saturday. We're going to talk a bit about that, folks. But we're happy that you guys are here with us this evening. We got the fight card set. We don't have too much time to play with this evening. Again, good to have each and every one of you on the live tonight, wherever you guys are joining us from. Share that live for us. Smash that emoji button, folks. Welcome in the ring. Believe it or not, it's already the 11th day of September. The folks here on this side of the Atlantic in the north are reflecting on 22 years ago and what happened at the World Trade Center. Our thoughts and prayers go to Americans everywhere tonight. But good to have you wonderful folks joining us in the ring. As I said, we got quite a few things we want to share with you folks. First up, I want to let you know and remind you guys that on the 16th, I'm in Georgia and I'm looking forward to seeing each and every one of you down there in Georgia. Looking forward to it bigly. There is the address, Conyers, Georgia, on the 16th. It's from 4 in the afternoon to 8. Folks, I am looking forward to seeing each and every one of you. As we said, we got quite a few things on the fight card tonight, guys. The carnage on our roads and waterways, they continue almost unabated. We are watching that. Lost a father and a daughter over the weekend at Mahika. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And again, circle back to the Irfaan Ali's press conference. And you all know what? Osman actually strikes again. This is the fellow who had gone to Marriott, run up a huge bill on a date, and left his date there unceremoniously to struggle with that very large, humongous, bigly bill. We can talk a little bit about Mr. Archer as well. Good folks, we are simply delighted to have all of you folks on the live with us tonight. That's some of what we have on the fight card. Good folks, that's some of what we have on the fight card. You all know, those of you who are ardent viewers of our program, you all know by now where we're going. We got the opener set, folks. We have the opener set. As we told you guys, there's that press conference on Saturday looking at the mid-year, half-year economic report. How the economy is doing in Guyana. If we finally have the press conference on Saturday morning, and one of the things he spoke about in that press conference, folks, is the Chief Justice. Well, Starbuck News called him out. Starbuck News called him out. On that note, take a look and take a listen to some of what Irfaan Ali said on the appointment of the Chief Justice when that question was asked by, of all places, the Guyana Times. Nonetheless, take a look, take a listen.
Good morning, Mr. President. Panu Manakchan, Guyana Times. What can you say about the appointment of a substantive Chancellor and Chief Justice?
Well, I can't say much at the moment, but to say that we have now a Judicial Service Commission. My last update from the Commission is that they have started their work. They're looking at the judiciary in a broad and holistic way to see, because it is not only Chancellor and the Chief Justice that we are talking about. It is vacancies that exist in the entire judicial system. So they're looking at this in a very holistic and broad way. and I don't want to speak on behalf of the Judicial Service Commission, but I know they have started their work.
Yeah, that's some of what we saw out of Irfaan Ali, folks, over the weekend, as I said, in that press conference that dealt squarely with the PPP's mid-year financial report and what he said as concerns the appointment of the Chief Justice and the Chancellor. Well, as we said, Sabak News in its editorial just today took him to task on that. And Sabak News, one of the things they're saying in that editorial, they says, if there was ever any doubt whether or not Irfaan Ali was going to appoint the current office holders who have held those positions for a number of years, he's not going to do it. He is not going to do it at all. That is what Sabak News is saying on that front. Irfaan Ali is not going to appoint the current office holders, the acting chancellor. He's not going to appoint the acting chief justice to those roles. As a matter of fact, in that editorial today, and you guys, I recommend that for you, for your reading homework, for your reading, go back to that editorial. The header for the editorial is appointment of the chancellor and chief justice. And here the editorial says, when he was first asked, rather, at Saturday's press conference about the two appointments, the president answered as if he was ignorant to the Constitution or pretending to be so. There is no link, this is Sabak News, there is no link between the work of the Judicial Service Commission, the JSC, and the substantive appointment of the Chancellor and Chief Justice as is governed by Article 127 of Guyana's Constitution. There is no link. Sabak News is absolutely right. The President had made this error before. Sabak News says the President has made this error before, and his repeating of it on Saturday is nothing short of disgraceful. Those are Sabak News words. Disgraceful. That's what Sabak News called it. Disgraceful that he put a link to the Judicial Service Commission looking at other things and his appointment of the Chancellor and Chief Justice. Disgraceful. Folks, again, I want to recommend very highly to you folks the rest of that editorial out of Sabak News. It should be required reading for Guyanese everywhere. And while we run that, folks, I want to push on to some of the things we are covering locally, because I want to get into that substantive press conference that Irfaan Ali had on Saturday, and I want to put things into context for you with economist Elson Lowe, who is going to be joining us very shortly to help us make sense of some of what we heard Irfaan Ali said on Saturday morning, and see whether or not you and I are wrong on our assumptions thus far and our own thinking on aspects of that press conference thus far. But first, folks, we want to bring you up to speed with some of the things we are covering in the 592 expository, and that has been the way it has been all weekend long. We got to stem the tide of some of the things we are seeing, carnage on our road and waterways. And one of the things we saw over the weekend, as we said when we started, is that horrific accident at the Hoop Mahika, in which 11-year-old Jamila Rudder lost her life along, they said, with 4 other persons on Saturday last. Again, this is the Hoop Mahika, East Coast, Demerara, and the postmortem examination results reveal that young Miss Rudder there died of a broken neck because of the impact of that collision. That is what the postmortem examination results revealed just today. Her mother, Jamila Rudder's mother, Shanika Henry, told reporters on Saturday that her daughter had left New Amsterdam Berbice early Saturday morning to receive an award for her performance at the NGSA assessment, the NGSA examinations, with her father, Jason Rudder, 37 years old, of Glasgow Housing Scheme, who took her to that award ceremony. It is upon their return that horrific accident happened. And if you guys think that over the weekend the car didn't stop there was a motorcycle accident at Cornelia Ida that claimed the life of Andre Ali over the weekend. There was another accident at Luke Creek over the weekend as well, and even up on the East Coast last evening we saw another accident. Clearly, folks, We got a lot of work to do. I see we got a new traffic chief. We can talk about that on the other side. Among other things, we're going to have some other information for you on the other side of this interview that we have coming up with the economist Elson Lowe on that press conference on Saturday morning, as we said. And we want to hasten to that because, you know, these are very, very important things that are happening in our country. The way the performance of the economy, you know, they blame us for a lot of things, but they've been at the helm for 3 years and still blaming us. So folks, I want us to welcome this evening the one and only economist, the economist extraordinaire, the young Elson Lowe. Welcome, Elson.
Happy to be on. Always fun to have a chat.
Excellent. You might have been attuned to that press conference yesterday morning. The President, Irfaan, had a press conference preempting the release of the mid-year financial report of his administration, his stewardship, his governance of the economy. They want to come out with a bold face to say all is well. They're boasting several things. Why don't we start our discussion on that front? I want you to take a listen to a broad sweep of what he said has happened in the economy. Several of the areas he's boasting. We're going to zero in on some issues like gold and sugar and some other things later on in our discussion. But a broad sweep of some of what he said yesterday morning. Take a listen, and then I'd love to have some of your views on the other side of this.
Agriculture, forestry, and fishing expanded by an estimated 7.6% in the first half of this year. When compared to the first half of 2022, the sugar industry grew by 30.1%. And as you know, the rice industry in the first half of this year, when compared to 2022, grew by an estimated 3.2%. And we're seeing the steady growth of the industry. Other crop sector is estimated to have grown by 9.4% in the first half of this year. The livestock industry, and you all know because we have dealt with this as a sector by itself, would have grew by an estimated 9.4% in the first half of this year. The livestock industry has expanded by an estimated 4.7%. The forestry sector, the forestry industry, this is an industry that was in total ruins. Virtually, this industry was completely shut down. The forestry sector in the first half of this year grew by 4.5%. 4.5% growth in the forestry sector. But in the first half of this year, other mining and quarrying grew by 45.2%. Looking at sand, and this is expected to even grow faster and further. The manufacturing sector is estimated to have grown by 17.7%. And this is important because these are the sectors that we are putting a lot of emphasis on. And the manufacturing sector grew by 17.7%, driven largely by increases in the manufacturing of wood products, fabricated metal products, non-metallic products, paints, and plastic products. Those categories would let you understand that the growth is not only at the macro level, the growth is at the household level and at the community level, driven by a very strong, robust, and accelerated housing program of the government of Guyana.
The economy, according to PPPC-led administration and led by Irfaan. Fact, fiction, myth, economists?
Yeah, well, I think what is important for citizens to understand is that a lot of those numbers come as against a backdrop of very poor performance in 2022, especially earlier on in 2022. You'll recall, viewers, that we had very poor performance regarding sugar, where they substantially underperformed a reduced total. And you'll recall that many other industries did not perform as well as expected in 2022. As another example, the manufacturing sector had underperformed, and so this is kind of a rebound from the manufacturing sector. But really, if you start with low performance, then it is very easy for you to record growth. So as an example, with sugar, if you start with very poor performance, then any improvement will look like a big improvement, even though you're not actually producing sugar at the levels that you were producing it before. And so even with this increase, sugar will still be tens of thousands of tons below the normal really production level of sugar for the last several years, which is around 90,000 tons or so. So we'll still be way below that. I believe this year's estimate is 57,000 tons or 60,000 tons about. But that's still way below where we expect it to be. As a result, while you're seeing some improvements, it's not at all what we would need to see in order to see movement in the right direction. Of course, those are figures just off the top of my head, but that's the general trend that we've been seeing. One thing that was not mentioned, and which of course has been buried in the statistics, is the question of the fisheries sector. There was mentioned that between fisheries and forestry or something like that, that there was growth, but actually, if you look at the report, it will show that, or at least it's been reported that the fisheries sector has actually declined. The reason that is particularly important to Guyanese is that there's a lot of domestic consumption of fish. To see a decline in the fish sector really will mean that, and this is what we've observed, isn't it? There's a lack of fish on the market, therefore you're going to see high prices for fish. If you have a decline in an industry that a lot of people depend on locally. And so that is an example of how, whereas you're seeing on a macro level reduction, a fall in a particular industry, on a micro level, it's having an impact on the average Guyanese right on their kitchen table, because it means that the price of fish will be higher, which is unfortunate, number one, for consumers, but from the other perspective, it's bad for fisher folk who are again under pressure in an industry that has been under pressure for a few years now, with complaints that the price of fish has doubled and all sorts of things that you're hearing from people on the ground. And so if you unpack the numbers, you can kind of get a sense of what really is the truth of it, and that is just looking at the president's remarks. There are a couple areas that he did not touch on properly. Of course, we've spoken a bit about Gaisuku, but we have to go into that in a bit more depth. Also, there's the question of gold production, which is again shrunk by something like 11% this year, or in this last report. Now, gold production last year was again down, and it has not been at the level that it was, nowhere near the level that it was on the coalition. In fact, we're heading to about half the level of production that we saw under the coalition for gold. That is very concerning, and we can get into a little bit of depth regarding gold and sugar and their impact regarding the exchange rate, because it is linked to a second problem that we're seeing in the economy. And so, yes, improvements, but not improvements that bring us to where we expect to be. Rather, we're still behind where we would expect to be. Even when you look at rice is still only barely keeping pace with production under the coalition, and in fact has been typical in the past few years. And here again, at a level that is not as high, or not as high as you would expect, relative to the production under the coalition, where rice was at record levels on more than one occasion.
Excellent. Folks who, if you're now joining us, we encourage you to share the live, smash that emoji button, and partner with us as well. Privileged to have as our guest this evening as we talk about the PPP's financial mid-year report. And we're privileged to have economist Elson Lowe join us to try to make sense of some of these numbers, if there's any sense to be made of them. One of the things that we spoke about earlier, Elson, we touched on sugar. I want to circle back there because billions upon billions of dollars, I think it's probably over 60 billion by now, poured into the sugar industry. None of the sugar estates have been opened. They're touting that they've grown sugar by 30.1% over the last 6 months. But then they've had a lot of revised sugar projections since they came into office. This is some of what Irfaan said earlier on sugar.
I don't have to remind you what was the state of sugar between 2015 and 2020. I don't have to remind you as to who closed the industry down. The sugar industry grew by 30.1%. And as you know, we are fully committed to the sugar industry, the revival of this industry, and the integration of this industry in the local economies in the regions of our country.
Economists fully committed, but they've closed some estates themselves based on where sugar and sugar prices on the world market are fully committed, but they're not meeting with the sugar workers who are striking. What do you make of the performance?
Listen, Sherrod, what the president said there is totally false. The first thing being that sugar production under the coalition was far, far higher than under the PPP currently, to the point almost of being double production at some stages, you know. Now, they've, of course, promised to reopen these estates. We haven't seen, you know, years have passed. We haven't seen any motion on that. We're seeing sugar workers protesting. The president talks about 30% growth, but that is against a loss last year or a reduction last year.
Correct.
In the amount of sugar that was produced, a very sharp reduction. In fact, I believe sugar underperformed its expectations by about 30% by the end of the year. So it's just that they've, even in the best case scenario, reclaimed where they were supposed to be last year. That's the first point. But the second is, they actually had significantly cut the target for last year from 90,000 tons to 60,000 tons. So even that reduced total, they weren't able to make last year. And now they've only rebounded to that reduced total, which is of course far below. I think our peak production, or when we gotten, there was 180,000 tons or something like that being produced at one point. So you're talking way, way, way less sugar. It is in a crisis. Really, the sugar industry is in a severe crisis. The performance
shortages, people having to line up, sugar being rationed, and all that under this administration.
Yeah, exactly. And your viewers will recall that under the coalition, the production of sugar was much higher. Now, that has a couple of knock-on effects. Of course, you're talking about shortages in terms of us being on the local market able to access sugar. But in addition to that, sugar is always been a foreign exchange earner for us here in Guyana. And having such low production levels means that we're not going to be able to get anywhere near the foreign exchange totals that we were previously getting. And so I think at least in part, the foreign exchange shortage that business people have been complaining about in Guyana is partially due to the severe crisis in the sugar industry. One of the other things that we also need to point out is that the PPP has not been able to really satisfy sugar workers and satisfy anyone looking at the industry that they're serious about moving it forward. We even saw former President Ramatar saying very early in the PPP's time in office that he doesn't believe that their efforts to turn around the sugar industry are serious efforts. And if he is saying that, you kind of get some perspective. Yeah.
He's the chairman of the Isuko board in addition to president.
Exactly. So for him to come out publicly and say that, he must have been quite alarmed by what he was seeing. And following his remarks, you've seen sugar production fall off a cliff, haven't you? So yes, very concerning. There's serious need for Isuko to be looked at. We're looking at it. We believe that diversification is necessary. We believe that some sugar workers will be migrated to the oil and gas industry, but not just because we want to migrate them to move them away from sugar. We want them to get access to higher paying jobs. That's a key focus for us, higher paying jobs. And of course, given the track record that we have regarding sugar, which is far superior to the PPP's track record regarding sugar, we can assure the Guyanese public that we'll be able to do a better job in terms of your sugar production more generally. But right now, what's going on the PPP is cause for serious concern and is having a secondary effect across the Guyanese economy, because if business people are not able to access foreign exchange, then they can't bring in goods. If they can't bring in goods, then there'll be a shortage of the goods, and that of course pushes the prices of goods up. And so it is a knock-on effect that's causing problems across the economy.
Yeah. So Elson, on that note, not only was sugar in the stratospheric levels of production during the AFC tenure, another area we were doing very well in the economy is gold and gold declarations. I mean, it was way up. And what we heard is not even a figure being quoted by Irfaan. He was kind of dodging in this press conference yesterday morning, preempting their administration's mid-year financial report. This is some of what he said on that front.
We are working now with our miners, our gold miners, and the bauxite industry on a path of one, expanding production and going to the root cause of the slothful declaration in the first quarter of this year when we look at the gold declaration. We have seen marked improvement in the last 30 days, but that is an ongoing conversation that will be supported by various consultation, investigation that we are doing in the entire sector, so that we can have a firm understanding and take the necessary policy, make the necessary policy intervention that would see the continued growth and expansion of this industry.
Interesting. He says they've seen some improvement in the run-up to the release of their half-year report, but he still doesn't quote a figure how gold is doing. Elson?
Yeah, gold is also in crisis right now. What has happened is that our peak in terms of gold production was about 22,000 kilograms or something like that. And that was in the midst of the coalition's term, and we were able to keep gold production quite high over the course of our term. Now the thing is, gold production since then, or at least gold declarations, have again fallen off a cliff, where you've seen it go into the teens, 15,000 and so on, and lower than that actually. And the concern with an 11% fall in gold production that has come out of this report is that you're going to continue to see a downward trend, or at least these low levels of gold declarations. Why is that a problem? Well, or rather, what are the causes of that? Well, there's two things that have been cited. We've cited one recently at our press conferences. One being that a lot of gold miners are being pulled away, or at least the gold industry is reporting that a lot of gold miners are being pulled away to the oil and gas industry. That is concerning, and that represents the resource movement effect of Dutch disease. So again, alarming. But the second being that there's a question around the reporting. Now, that says that you have to have two solutions to this. One, you have to look at the wages that are being earned in the gold industry and ensure that those wages are appropriate wages. We've spoken about things like salary top-ups to ensure that Guyanese are earning at a reasonable level, about moving the income tax threshold up so that Guyanese again are able to get more out of their earnings. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that there needs to be we need to work closely with the GGMC to look at the gold miners and the declarations and that process to ensure that the declarations are meeting the levels that they should meet. Of course, we worked closely with GGMC and the Gold Board when we were in government to ensure that we had the level of declarations that we're supposed to have. And so those are the two elements of this that need to be dealt with in order to move the gold industry forward. We've seen them try various tax cuts and other measures, but those don't really get at the problem. The problem is not a supply side problem necessarily. It is a labor problem, and it is a compliance problem. So that is, we're getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty. But that's what needs to happen in order to see gold production reach the levels that it should. Now, what's the negative, and what does this mean for Guyanese? First of all, of course, it's very alarming if generally speaking, one of our largest exports, or second largest export after oil being gold, typically, if that particular area is under pressure, that would be an area, be a matter of serious concern. Of course, we don't want to end up totally dependent upon oil, first of all, our economy to be totally dependent upon oil, but second of all, for our foreign exchange. That would be, a concern. We are looking to diversify the economy, not shrink the diversity of the economy. That's the first thing. The second is that, of course, gold is, again, a great foreign exchange earner for the country because, pretty much all of Guyana's gold is exported. We consume very little gold locally, of course. Now, if you have a reduction in your gold export, it means you're not going to have as much foreign currency. And again, that's one of the factors that is impacting this shortage of foreign currency. Again, this is indicative of Dutch disease, the resource movement effect of Dutch disease. And so what we're seeing right now is a foreign currency crisis, which is coming on the back of poor management of key sectors, sugar and gold, of the economy, key sectors. Now, what does this mean for you as a consumer? Again, it means that it may be more difficult to get access to goods because importers can't import them. They can't get foreign currency to import them. That's going to drive up the price of goods. And so all of these things lead to a higher cost of living. And so just to give your viewers some perspective, what's been going on with gold, what's been going on with sugar, and what's been going on with fish, that really, those three add up to a higher cost of living for the average Guyanese, and are very alarming developments. And so while the government is trying to paper over by focusing on some of the smaller industries, what they're not doing is addressing the big problems, and there are big problems.
Very interesting discussion. Folks, if you're now joining us, we have economist Elson Lowe examining the PPP's mid-year financial report. Elson just talked there about gold declarations, which preface our discussion on that because that came up as part of the mid-year report as well. What foreign exchange is doing. We were throwing shades at the Trinidadians just recently where foreign exchange is concerned, and we seem to have some trouble on our hand. The president says all is well with foreign exchange, yet he's having an emergency meeting with bankers and others. While gold got a problem, Elson, but he doesn't seem to be so sensitive about meeting urgently with the miners with gold declaration. Take a listen to what he said in that press conference Saturday morning, on their mid-year financial report, and more specifically, where foreign exchange is concerned. Take a listen.
One of the issues in the public domain is the foreign exchange market. And I've seen a lot of debate in relation to the foreign exchange rate and availability of foreign currency. Now, it is important for us to understand that the foreign exchange market and the rate on the foreign exchange market is no longer determined by the government, but to a large extent by market forces of demand and supply. And I think recently in one of the press conferences of the Vice President, he pointed to this and he elaborated on the role of the market, issues of hoarding by market players. But when I review the statistics from the Bank of Guyana and the cambios, and listening to the governor of the central bank and the technical team, they're of the opinion, based on the data, that they have sufficient foreign currency to satisfy the existing demand.
He goes on to say there that he's instructed his Minister of Finance to meet today, this afternoon, the public meeting as we speak, with the bankers and other stakeholders on the issue of foreign exchange. Economists?
Yeah, so this is another one where the government is trying to pull the wool over Guyanese eyes. This is not the first time that they've said, oh, it's the banks are hoarding. I think this is the third time that they've said that, spanning almost a year.
Correct.
Now, if it is banks and the banks are hoarding, they would have been able to figure that out by now. right? They wouldn't have needed to say this over and over and over again. So I think Guyanese are not buying that anymore. And I think even when you've seen the Private Sector Commission and GCCI come out to say, I believe both of them, that there is a problem regarding foreign exchange, that tells you that it's a very serious problem. Now, we have just listed for your viewers 2 specific problems with the supply of foreign currency. So there's not enough foreign exchange coming in because 2 of the areas that we usually get a large amount of foreign exchange in the non-oil economy, gold and sugar, have massively underperformed. Okay, so that's the starting point. And to give your viewers a further sense of it, there was a fluctuation in 2017 or so regarding the availability of foreign currency. Remember, there were some concerns around that. And this came after there was a reduction in sugar production. So we've seen in the past sugar production coincide with fluctuations in the foreign currency market. We were able to deal with that lack of foreign currency because gold production was at record highs and therefore was able to compensate, right? That's one of the ways we were able to compensate as a country. But if you've simultaneously got gold and sugar in a difficult position, then you're going to be short in terms of your supply of foreign currency. And that would, of course, reasonably explain what's going on with people not being able to access foreign currency. Makes perfect sense. Now, for them to the government to be trying to say, oh, it's Trinidadians and so on, they seem to be making it seem as if Trinidadians didn't exist before, and they're somehow all of a sudden Trinidadians are doing this. I mean, Trinidadians have been doing business with Guyana for the longest while, and so there isn't any reason to think that all of a sudden patterns in Trinidad have so suddenly shifted as to cause a problem. However, what we have noticed is that there is clear evidence that the supply areas that provide supply of foreign currency are under pressure and underperforming. So we could rely on speculation that it is Trinidad, or we could rely on the facts, which is that those are the areas that are in a difficult position. Also, while of course banks may want to keep foreign currency for customers that have a long history of dealing with them, banks of course will profit by trading between each other. They can profit from that, and so they have an incentive to provide foreign currency once it is available to each other. So I don't know if I buy that the banks are just hoarding the foreign currency either. That seems kind of strange to me. Number one. Number two, why all of a sudden would the banks be hoarding foreign currency to themselves? Why all of a sudden would that be the case? Last year they didn't think that they could do that. All of a sudden they think that they could do that. I mean, that seems strange to me. And so you could believe the bluff, as I call it, of speculating, oh, it's Trinidadians, or it's the banks. Well, you could believe just basic numbers, right? The areas where we get foreign currency from, we're not getting the foreign currency. Therefore, there's a shortage of foreign currency. Pretty straightforward, right? But that's not the path they want to go down, because then they have to take responsibility for Gaisuko and for the gold industry, and they don't want to take responsibility for the failures that have occurred there. Really, they got to get those right. Otherwise, this problem will persist. Alternatively, they could use resources from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, get some of those dollars, some of those US dollars into the Guyanese economy. But the Vice President has already ruled that out. I think it is very naive of him to rule that out. But there are ways that you could get foreign currency into the Guyanese economy, working along with the Bank of Guyana, that would alleviate this crisis. If you don't think that you're going to be able to sort out the gold and sugar problems that you're facing. However, what I would say, of course, is this: we should be sorting out the gold and sugar issues. We shouldn't be just hiding from them. They have to be dealt with. But the trajectory the government is on, it doesn't seem like they intend to deal with them. That, of course, is is symptomatic of, as I said, an element of Dutch disease, which is the resource movement effect. So we are now sliding towards Dutch disease because the government is unwilling to address the real causes of these problems.
Exactly. Some of the big numbers quoted in that press conference on Saturday morning regarding the mid-year PPP's financial report on the economy. We had a big number for sugar, as we said. There was a big one for mining and so on. There was another big one, I think. Real GDP, this says, 59.5, I think. Non-oil GDP, Guyanese hurting still, I've listened to you many times, Economist Lowe, talk about the cost of living and providing a lot of prescription to ease the cost of living. Here's what Irfaan said on the real GDP yesterday and the non-oil growth. Take this.
We are a country pursuing a balanced, holistic, diversified portfolio that will see sustainability and resilience of our economy, our country, and our people. And that is the context through which the investment in Guyana and the different sector is taking place. And as a result of this wide approach, this holistic approach, in the first half of 2023, real GDP grew by an estimated 59.5%. But important to note is that the non-oil economy grew by 12.3% in the first half of this year. And this is as a direct result of the policy matrix of the government and the country, investing, reigniting the traditional sectors, and expanding our economic footing.
What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that he's talking about the diversification of the economy when he talks about the increase in the non-oil GDP. But if you're seeing both sugar and gold shrinking, then it seems to me that you're becoming less diversified rather than more diversified. Of course, there's some small areas like shrimp production, which we're supportive of, which is increasing, but it is not on the scale that it could replace these major industries. We've even seen rice come under pressure from time to time. Therefore, we're seeing our major industries, non-oil industries, under pressure. While at the same time, you're hearing the government say that they're diversifying the economy. So it seems to me that the opposite of that is what's happening. That's to say, our non-oil areas are shrinking. Now, as it concerns the specific increase, the 12% increase that he mentioned of the non-oil economy, it depends on where that increase is housed. Of course, you've seen a boom in construction. But if construction, in terms of growing the economy, is only around, housing, while it is important Guyanese get housing, that's not necessarily an industry that's going to generate revenue and export revenue and so on, because ultimately building houses here in Guyana is not exporting houses. What we need to look at in terms of the sustainability of the economy is areas where we are able to generate revenue with some export driven sectors. That is ultimately going to be vital if we want to maintain the economic growth and the prosperity that we're looking for, because we need to be able to get that foreign exchange outside of the oil industry. And so maybe manufacture for export would be a focus. To what extent products in Guyana are exported that are manufactured is maybe another question, because as he mentioned earlier, you've got increase in I think it's furniture production or something to that effect. But that sounds to me like furniture for houses, right? So not necessarily furniture that's being exported. So that is where a big focus needs to be. We've spoken about removing all taxes for manufacturing in the agro-processing area, but there are other areas where we have advantages that we need to leverage so that we can have an export sector that is expanding, so that we can have proper diversification. As it stands, that's not what we're seeing at all. We're seeing growth, but not the type of growth that is going to lead you to a sustainable economy. That to me is the core of the narrative that is missing. The areas, and we mentioned services, we mentioned export-oriented growth, those areas that we really need to see improvement on. That's not where you're seeing the type of improvement you're supposed to see. So as a result, there's a lot of skepticism and anxiety that I think these numbers would provoke on anybody looking closely at them. The second thing I would say is, so of course, the biggest driver of Guyana's growth is the oil sector, and that's great. But one of the things we want to point out is that the oil sector is tremendously concentrated in terms of having a small number of employees, and it isn't something that necessarily will directly benefit everyone across the economy. Therefore, we have to look at ways of improving everyone's life, via the revenues from the oil industry and dealing with the cost of living crisis that we're facing currently. That means things like salary top-ups, as we have described, which would use some of the revenues that we get to increase the salaries of workers on the lower end of the income scale. And that, studies have shown, will first of all increase the participation of people in the marketplace, so more people will work. But second of all, will cut poverty, cut childhood malnutrition, those types of things. So, and even improve test scores because people are no longer the working poor. Those are the types of things that we have to do with these revenues, rather than just proclaiming that there's growth. We have to actually use the revenues that are generated in a way that will deal with some of the core issues that are our focus. One, alleviating poverty. Two, growing the economy. If we're not using the revenues in the right way, then clearly we're not going to get the results that we want. And so you'll have big numbers, but people on the ground will continue to feel that the growth of the economy isn't benefiting them.
Exactly. And as we wrap up, there was a hint at perhaps raising the daily minimum wage. This is what people perhaps want to see, because as we said, they're hurting economically based on all the reasons you so elegantly and eloquently pointed out are the faults in the administration of the economy where the PPP are concerned. There was a hint of it yesterday that maybe we're going to have some more money in our pockets. Nothing definitive, and Irfaan Ali went about it in such a convoluted way. A lot of persons saying this is just some red meat being sprinkled there like some spice in an otherwise dreary and petrid presentation on the mid-year financial report. Take a listen as we wrap up.
We are a country pursuing. We will recall that we went to the electorate in 2020 with a program described as a manifesto, and the electorate would have elected their government of choice based on that program. As I speak to you today, we are now exceeding the commitment we made in that manifesto. On the economy, I am currently re-evaluating our revenues, projected revenues, the economy based on its strength, to analyze whether and when, not whether and when, because we have the capacity, and further adjustment in the daily minimum wage. So this is something that I am presently reviewing with an aim at a further adjustment in the daily minimum wage. Also reviewing the absorptive capacity at further advancing liquidity in your pocket.
Liquidity in the pocket of Guyanese, Economist Lowe.
Well, listen, I'll believe it when I see it if there's any change in the minimum wage. The reason I say that is that viewers will perhaps recall, that last year to get the government to raise the minimum wage, it was quite a fight. We had to go after them at press conference after press conference. The last thing I recall saying is that Guyanese are filled with disgust that the government is not raising the minimum wage during this time of plenty. And then eventually they raised the minimum wage, and of course it wasn't raised to the extent that we would have liked to see it raised to. So let us see whether or not they're actually going to do anything. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that as it regards disposable income in Guyanese's pockets, we have pointed out several measures that could be taken. Well, as an example, last year we received an unexpected additional $60 billion because of the high oil price. We've said that money should be equitably distributed to help Guyanese through the cost of living crisis. The government has had no interest in that. They barely put aside $5 billion, and they didn't even spend the $5 billion last time we checked. I don't know who puts aside money and then doesn't spend the money. That's absurd to me. But there really should be at least $60 billion over and above the normal measures. We have to understand that as a country that is an oil producer, often when there's high prices and inflation, we will also be benefiting through higher oil revenues. And so it is a deliberate choice by the government to let Guyanese suffer through the cost of living crisis, rather than to help them because the government was getting more revenue than it even thought that it would get. That is, to me, really disturbing that the government allowed that to last for so long. Now I think they're just throwing out some comments because they're under a lot of pressure. But to me, if you have put aside $5 billion for the cost of living crisis, and you yourself hadn't spent this $5 billion 7 months into, this is the last time we asked them, 7 months into your time in office, then it seems you're 7 months into the year. It seems to me that you don't want to spend the money. So for you to come now and say that you're going to spend money, it's hard for people to believe you, right? I mean, it's not we said you should put aside more, but the little you put aside, you weren't spending. Like, why? That is alarming. And therefore, I think there's not reason for too much optimism as the government is speaking. That's the first half of it. The second half of it is that the government just doesn't seem to understand the scale of the change that has happened in Guyana. And that these sort of little tiny measures of 5 billion there or 4 billion there. You recently saw the vice president say that the pensioners can expect a $7,000 increase between now and 2025. Only $7,000. That's crazy to me. By 2025, Guyana could, if things remain as they stand, Guyana could be the wealthiest country per capita in the entire world at purchasing power parity. That's a measure that economists use. We could have something like 5, maybe 10% higher GDP than Liechtenstein. Yeah, people don't even know where is Liechtenstein. And by next year, we should be within the top 5, give or take, of the countries with the highest income per capita by some measures. So for them to be coming with these, a $35 or $7,000, $35 pension increase, it's almost as if they have no idea what's going on.
Shame on them.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. You can't have a country. Right now, the country, by some measures, has a higher per capita income than the United Kingdom. Higher per person income than the United Kingdom. Higher than the entire Eurozone. By next year, 5th highest. The following year, highest in the world by a gap. And you come into people with a few dollars here. And this is unbelievable. And frankly, it's despicable that this is the way the government is approaching it. They totally need to rethink this and come to grips with the fact that the country is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we cannot have people on this punishment wage and struggling to get by. It's manifestly ridiculous, and it's going to be more and more ridiculous as time goes on.
Very interesting. Well, we're going to have to wait and see, I guess. That is what, because again, nothing definitive there. We'll review, and so I don't know if it's when we get to the second half year report, because I thought this was a review of how the economy is doing. He said we're going to wait and see and review and look to see. And then he seems to be a man that worried himself. Yes, we have the capacity, but we're going to still, because Zambia apparently hasn't given the final word on that. But Economist Lowe, I really want to thank you for coming on such short notice and spending this time with us. We have to wade through these economic issues because these are the bread and butter issues that continue to affect Guyanese on a daily basis. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me.
Folks, the one and only economist Elson Lowe, advisor to the PNCR and all things economics, and we're so privileged on such short notice to have him spend this time with us, wading through lots of these issues and helping us to make sense of them. I want to return to some of the things that we are tracking this evening before we let you guys go, before we let you guys run off. Some of the other things that we're tracking at this end. One of the things we're looking at is this post we saw by Gordon Mosley out of News Source, another great place for valid and incredible information. The PPP at the CGIA Rainbow Wall of Division. That's what some folks are calling it, and we told you about this. We did an interview with a gentleman who owns a shop in this area. Instead of trying to bring these shops up to a standard, they've just built a wall there to block it all out with some little openings for people to go through to shop at the back there. This, as Gordon says, is unacceptable in Gordon Mosley's word. I want to quote him. Veteran journalist Gordon Mosley says, in what appears to be an effort to block out small shops near the airport from public view, the authorities have erected a massive Trump-like wall with walk-in openings to the shops. Sections of the wall have been painted in multiple colors. It's not a good look, the journalist says. He says he visited several countries where shops have been brought up to certain standards in areas like this so that people can earn a decent living while also exuding the culture the contours, the authenticity of the people who inhabit that area. It's not a good look. The veteran journalist Gordon Mosley says it is not a good look. And I want to know, folks, who is this gentleman, Ricardo Bujinarain? The police force over the weekend, guys, put out. But before I get to Bujinarain, I want to talk about Oswin Big Marriott Bill Archer, who struck again over the weekend. They tell us this is a fellow. Before we get to what's happening on the roads, because he might be driving very fast right now. Oswin Big Marriott Bill Archer, racked up a huge bill at Marriott, was on a date there and then absconded, left the lady with a walk of shame. I know she had to wash some wares or what, but that happened in the past. Can't get into all the details right now as to what happened currently, but we made to understand that Archer owes a taxi driver over $30,000 from a joyride over the weekend. He borrowed $40,000 from the same taxi driver apparently, and then owes a $12,000 bill. In addition to all of that, so quite a bill Oswin Archer racked up over the weekend. Clearly, your brother has a problem. Where will he strike next? I mean, who? Beware, folks. Beware that. Those are the allegations that are being made this evening, guys. Those are the allegations being made. And as I preempted that bit on the new traffic chief, they're telling us that one senior superintendent, M. Singh, is Guyana's new traffic chief. He has served as regional commander out of Region 4 Division and takes over the reign there from Superintendent D. Stevens. We wish him well. We wish him well because he has his hands full. Traffic Chief Singh has his hands full. They released some information over the weekend that got people asking, who is this gentleman, Ricardo Bujinarain? Because he, racked up a lot of miles speeding, exceeded his speeding limits several times by that new access road there from Mandela Avenue to Eccles. 4, 5, 6 times he went over the speeding limits more than the ordinary person. He was only topped by one Delroy Cornet. Need for speed, folks. No doubt the new traffic chief, Mr. Singh, senior superintendent of police, Mr. Singh got his work cut out for him when you got these folks who got a need for speed. So there is Delroy Cornet who tops the list along with Ricardo Bujinarain, and that list put out by the traffic department showed you even have some businesses. You have some organizations, some entities, on that list as well, speeding above, going above the speed limit there in several instances. Folks, slow down, so we can all arrive alive. That is our encouragement to all of you. Slow down, so we can arrive alive. Folks, we've gone a little past our time this evening, and we don't want to detain you wonderful, fantastic folks any longer. I want to say thanks for joining us, folks. We know we had quite an interview with Elson Lowe, economist, but we needed to get into the weeds of what's happening economically in our country. What's happening with the economy, because we know lots of Guyanese are hurting. I want to thank you guys for sticking with us. As you go, folks, share the live, smash that emoji button, folks, and partner with us as well. Thank you so much for joining us. That's going to do it for us this evening. That's all time, good folks, and that's our program. Stay safe.
Want to keep getting the best in the ring?
That's right.
Yes, you can help us to keep going by partnering with us through your contributions. And it's easy. Send us a daily, weekly, or monthly donation, whichever is most convenient to you. Cash App at $in the ring 592, Zelle and PayPal inthering592@gmail.com, or WhatsApp us on 627-6963 for how to contribute via MoneyGram and Western Union